Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this bonus live episode of the Higher Ed Geek podcast, recorded here at South by Southwest EDU in Austin. Excited to be back and kicking things off. This is, if you're going to follow along with us, our first in a string of amazing conversations that we're planning to record here at the event. But we are starting off with Shaun Carver. You have a very interesting role, and that's part of what I like being here, kind of interesting intersections of folks that are kind of out of my bubble. So we'll be talking about kind of your work at the International House at UC Berkeley, as well as the International House Association, and just some of the kind of visa actions and things like, because sort of the storylines of this last year, and sort of how it's impacting students and institutions. But as we always do, if you want to briefly introduce yourself and share a bit about your background.
Yeah, so my name is Shaun Carver. I'm the executive director and CEO of International House at UC Berkeley, and we've been part of that campus since 1930, so coming up on our 100th anniversary in a few years. We're part of a network of international houses that were founded by John D. Rockefeller Jr. and JDR III, and eventually David Rockefeller, to open these international houses. And there's one in New York, adjacent to Columbia University. They opened Berkeley in 1930, one at University of Chicago in 32, Paris 36. There's an iHouse in Japan, as well as the India International Center in Delhi. And so collectively, of these Rockefeller houses, we are now the International House Association, and so I was fortunate enough to be supported by my colleagues to be president of that group as well. So really, the whole idea behind International House, dating back to the early 1900s, was really creating these really intentional, diverse communities. They brought people from around the world that were studying at universities in New York, and seeing all the benefits that happen when you sit down at a table and you have a meal and you start having conversations with different people and learning about their culture, their politics, their history, their views on life, and building friendships. And we believe that when you see people as people first and opinions second, it creates a more productive environment and a more peaceful world. And so that's been our mission for over 100 years. And you referenced the current times. We feel our work is not done. We probably have another century of work to keep going, but we've been in this for the long game. So.
Yeah, I appreciate that kind of context. I definitely wanted to kind of just understand more of the nature of the work and how it kind of proliferated and everything. And certainly, I feel like stuff like that kind of expands upon its success, that idea of like, I'm sure a lot of people kind of resonate with what you're speaking about, and like, making that space available to kind of foster those important conversations and that sort of impactful, change within, individuals, and that sort of rippling out. But if you just could like expand, I guess I'm curious, like how you came to this work, like what kind of parts of your background kind of had this all kind of resonate for you to now be in leadership position? Well,
like some of us, higher ed was a second career. So I was actually in the tech industry before I got into higher ed. I finished my MBA and decided instead of chasing commission checks and selling electronics, I got into teaching. And so I was teaching undergraduate business courses and marketing courses, economics courses, and had an opportunity to go to China for a year to teach in a dual degree program there. That led to 13 years of my life in China, and Shanghai and Beijing, all in international higher ed. And like a lot of us, we went from the classroom to management, and then eventually into leadership. In China, I was with Hult International Business School, which we had 80 different nationalities and a cohort of MBA students or Masters of International Business students there. That took me to Boston, which eventually took me back to San Diego, which is my home. So I was at UC San Diego at the business school there. And when this opportunity came up, it really felt like it was aligning my personal interests, which is I met my wife in China. Our kids are third culture kids, we call them now, I guess. And I traveled around the world and seen, how interesting and the world is, and how different it is, and how much I grew being exposed to different cultures. And then, when I saw this opportunity to come join iHouse, it just felt like my personal and professional careers were coming together into one. And I think the best you can hope for in life is when that happens. You can make a living doing what you want to do, and that really aligns with your core values as a person. So, I'm extremely fortunate to be where I
am. Yeah, that's awesome. And I think, it's like that idea of, your kind of story embodies that kind of like anecdotal confirmation of like you either had exposure to these things, maybe, just by happenstance of, like teaching in a certain program that had certain students and, just seeing, those sort of interactions and your own like travels. But that idea of, you know, a campus environment, whatever, like stuff like that does kind of just happen, but it's by like kind of putting all these people together and learning together. But then, what I always appreciate when folks kind of like try to kind of lasso and like harness, the potential of those sort of interactions and bring some intentionality around it, making those spaces available for people to kind of, opt into and, whatever else. So, appreciate you and your team and all the other international houses for doing that important work, and certainly like that much more important at this moment to I think kind of push back against sort of things that are happening culturally in the US and everything. So talk to me a little bit about like the context of this moment of visa actions, and we'll kind of break this apart of like how they're impacting students.
You just mentioned something I want to just touch on before I answer your question. And what International House actually does is, so, Rockefeller built this beautiful building with about 500 rooms, a huge dining hall, an auditorium. And so we house about 620 Berkeley students, academics. We have visiting faculty as well from, 80 different nationalities. So about half are undergrads, half are graduate students, and it's extremely diverse. I mean, our headlines, we kind of talk about the diversity of nationalities. But, just because you're from the United States doesn't mean you have the same political view or the same values or the same religion, and similar with those 80 different countries. And so, we have extreme diversity within this house. And it is counter to the narrative right now. We don't have a lot of conflict. We don't have fighting. Don't have people that want to square off or separate themselves from other people. They intentionally choose to stay at iHouse because they want to be surrounded by this diverse community. And they're open-minded, and they're listening, and they're learning. Not always agreeing, but at least acting in civil ways and disagreeing. And so that's what we do. That's how we deliver on this, making the world a more peaceful place, the mission that we have. But university campuses are quite different than that, because not everybody has that open-mindedness or wants to have their ideas questioned or challenged. And I think that's where the differences is on a campus. Like this is Berkeley, so there's protests and there's friction that happens all the time on campus, but it doesn't really enter iHouse, even though it's the same populations. And that's a bit of what my talk is here at South by Southwest, is talking about what do we do at iHouse that creates a much better environment to disagree and to protect people's voices, so that if you aren't the populist voice or opinion right now, do you feel safe to express your ideas and why you feel that way? And so that's, I think really important right now on college campuses, and as a country in general, is just recognize that, we're people first, we're opinions and ideas second, and the more we can look at each other as peers and have conversations and try to understand each other, the better off we're all going to be.
Yeah, and I think, it is that idea of like that kind of oasis in this moment of like visa action and everything. It might be people are trying to process these things and the sense of like, what are happening to kind of my neighbors, my peers, my fellow students, just kind of the whole kind of community that this institution is in. So I'd imagine, I guess, like the way that these actions are impacting students is obviously some students are individually being impacted by the visa actions, but then it is sort of like, there's like an air of ambiguity. People just don't know what's happening or whatever else. Like, so I'm sure it's just like a lot of negative effects, across the board in many different forms and shapes of how it's like impacting students.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we're not immune to the campus community and the challenges that higher ed faces, but we also are not immune from the administration and policies on visas. I mean, last year we had, I think about 84 different nationalities at iHouse. This year we're dealing with almost 60 countries that have either a full or partial travel ban. And so we work with the MasterCard Foundation, and we have about 35 different scholars from Africa that come and do degrees in public health, in business, in law, in media at Berkeley. And, a lot of the countries that are on the list were these countries that were sending these students through the MasterCard Foundation to get a degree from a top U.S. university and then go back and make a difference in their communities. And it used to be the soft power we were so proud of, and now we look at these folks and say that they're no longer wanted, that somehow not benefiting us in any way, and so they shouldn't be here. So yeah, it's we're not immune to that. I think we're in the low 70s of nationalities because of the travel ban. We have countries and perspectives that are not in the House this year that should be in the House, and that's on the community as well. And I don't see how that really benefits, our country right now.
Let's take a quick pause to talk about something big happening this summer, the Engage Summit 2026. The next era of higher ed isn't about adding more tools. It's about building the agentic campus, where AI works alongside your teams to recruit smarter, support students faster, and scale impact without burning people out. From real-world examples of agentic systems in action to hands-on sessions that show how AI can coordinate enrollment, marketing, advising, and operations, Engage Summit is where institutions move from experimentation to execution. If you're ready to design a campus where AI doesn't just assist, but instead acts, learns, and drives outcomes, then you'll want to be in Charlotte June 15th through the 17th. But it gets even better. As an Enrollify listener, you can grab your ticket for half off. Just head to engage.element451.com and use code Dustin50 to apply the 50% off discount. That's DUSTIN50. All right, let's get back to the conversation. Yeah, because I think it's even like, there's sort of a existential aspect to the, just sort of like, on a values-based thing or kind of traditions, norms, sort of the soft power that people, I think, would always kind of, associate with higher ed, like we were saying. And then I think like there's some of the practical pieces on like that institutional level. Like one is just introducing this sort of like chaos element, for lack of a better word, and the idea of like, it's kind of an awkward thing to deal with, of like students that are here that are, restricted from traveling because of like the bans and whatever else, or so just those difficulties, but then that sort of continuing of the like cooling of international recruitment of students, like, because it's like, okay, cool, now it's harder to manage working with the students we currently have, and then it's going to be that much harder to recruit new students for our programs from around the world. So I think it's that idea of like these institutions have certainly been impacted in a lot of ways. So maybe if there's ways that you can elaborate on how institutions have responded to these impacts and things, just to kind of give that other side of the coin.
Yeah, it's, there's the kind of the systematic challenges, but like if they can't get a visa, they can't get here, right? And so that's a challenge for us. The other is, okay, once they get here, is the environment make them feel welcome and supported? Certainly from if you're on the outside and looking in and reading the paper, watching the news, and listening to the narratives that's going on in the U.S., is this a place I want to go? Or if you're an undergrad, it's a parent saying, do I want to send my child to the U.S.? Is it safe? Are they going to be welcomed? Are they going to be supported there? Or should I just send them to the UK or Canada or Australia or
bring them back,
or keep them in Asia? Keep them in Asia, which has got really great universities now. I mean, if you look at the top 100, top 50 rankings, China and Asia in general have been moving up those lists, and so they have options at home now. So there's a lot of these different challenges that campuses are facing, and having to navigate those is certainly what I think a lot of the administrators and leaderships of universities are trying to manage right now. Just so many moving pieces that are happening so quickly, and where we used to have long debates, and you kind of get a sense of where things were going. If the discussions that were happening, if there was a bill that was proposed, and there was a debate about the bill, and then a vote on the bill, and then now it's just seems next week there's an executive order that drastically changes your business model, and it's unannounced, it's unprepared, and it just happens, and you have to quickly respond. And I think that's, in some ways, I've mentioned this before, but in some ways I think that was one of the benefits that came out of the COVID period, is that it forced universities to be able to react quickly. And I remember being at part of universities where talking about just launching an online course, and the faculty is R1 university, and faculty saying, well, our value proposition is a student sitting in a classroom face-to-face with me and listening to me talk, and we'll never be able to replicate that online, and we're never going to do it, and faculty senate doesn't support it. And then COVID hit, and quickly everything changed. And now we can launch these things quickly. So I think COVID kind of set the stage for universities and leadership and administration to be more open to rapid change. And culturally, I think these organizations are becoming better at changing quickly and responding to the issues as they pop up.
Yeah, that is like a kind of thing to note is like, culturally, the change management, the flexibility, the adaptability, in a lot of different regards, institutions are moving in the right direction with that. But I think, like to me, on the kind of core of it is these institutions cannot rest on their laurels of just sort of like, we're a great institution. We always just get a lot of international students and they stay and they're, whatever. It's like, okay, you've got to really be much more, I'm sure like hands-on with the international students that you have to make sure they feel supported and safe. And then I've been seeing headlines where like these like major budget shortfalls for institutions, and they'll just attribute either like entirely or a big chunk of it being to where like we just thought we were going to have a lot more international students, so like it's just like institutions just like the dollars and cents of it, where like again that's sort of resting on their laurels, where it's like we've got to right size and really make some big adjustments here because we can't just sit now because we have a huge deficit that we have to address, and this is one of the big causes of it.
I know you and your listeners are all in the industry, and certainly there's some self-reflection of, well, how did we become so dependent on international students? And you look at how state budgets have been, states budgets to the universities have been reduced, and how do they supplement that? And a lot of us leaned on international students and the tuitions that they brought. And, it's in some ways it's like a drug. It's like, it's hard to unwind that once you start having, that revenue hitting your budget and supporting your missions. And so I think there is some self-reflection. Did we go too far? Some universities have, much higher percentage of international students than others. It's interesting right now. We were kind of anticipating a decline in international students, and certainly if you read, all of the data that's out there, then there has been a decline in international students this year. However, it's not equal. Right. You look at Berkeley this year, which has the brand of UC Berkeley and the number one public university in the world. We have the most international students we've ever had this year. And I think what we take from that is that if you got an opportunity to come to Berkeley or Stanford or Harvard or Chicago or one of these name brand Ivy League plus schools, regardless of the current environment, regardless of the challenges you're going to face, you're going to go. If you're at a regional school, a state school, maybe that's not the decision you make. Yes, I could go to this state school, or I could go to the UK. Maybe that seems like a better. Mm-hmm. But if you got an opportunity to go to a top university and get the advantages of that brand name on your resume and the networks and the education and the research, the country could be on fire. You're still going to go. Sometimes it feels like it's on fire.
Yeah. Literally or metaphorically, or
I'll just leave it at that. But I mean, you see a lot of these other schools that are really struggling because of the impact that the current environment is having, and I would say that that's the challenge of the next 5 years, is how to adjust your business models and your budgets to deal with potentially less international students. Mm-hmm. And I think AI will probably step in and help with a lot of that. We don't want to geek out too much, but
you have to give it like honorable mention in every podcast. Like sometimes you have to intentionally weave it in. I feel like it creeps its way in, because I think that idea of if you've got the right tech ecosystem, how it can conform your strategy around where are we seeing growth, and what populations, and trying to really lean into that as there's other areas where you're sort of kind of feeling the heat. I think that the idea of hoping that institutional leaders continue to equip themselves with the right tools and platforms to feel empowered to make smart decisions as they're grappling with so much kind of turbulence and everything. Because I think that's kind of a deal across the board. And I was even thinking that idea of people kind of wax poetic about the enrollment cliff as well. And it's that is also equally distributed. So I think it's that idea of there's just this chasm of kind of the haves and the have-nots within higher ed of certain institutions. Certainly if they're making good investments and good, kind of planting of seeds in years back, they're sort of, in a stronger place than other folks who are feeling the heat on international student enrollment challenges and, the enrollment demographic cliffs and things like that. So yeah, I think it's a interesting moment across the board, I guess, again, sort of to that core point of like, how are institutional leaders developing their strategy and informing it, hopefully with, AI and other, smart
A lot of these
tools.
things that are happening really are attacking the revenue side, right? I mean, a drop of international students that hits the revenue, the reduction of federal funding or grants and research funds going down. And so what if you can't do anything on the revenue side, then you have to attack the expense side. And let's face it, anyone who's looking at all of the research and predictions of AI is admin jobs are the number one thing that can be replaced by AI. And, a lot of the research on AI is happening at these universities. I can't imagine that there's a lot of disruption that's going to be happening and reductions of workforces on universities. If I was a leader of a university right now and I didn't have a really good 5-year strategic plan that, mentions the word AI throughout it, I think I would be kicking that process off pretty quickly because in the next 5 years it may be too late. If we listen to the folks talking about AI and how quickly it's going to impact job markets.
Yeah, because I think, again, like that decision-making piece, AI is, playing a role there. But then, like what we're teaching about, how we're teaching about it, AI is in those kind of conversations as well. But I think, you already kind of hitting on some of my final questions. So I'll take a little bit of a pivot and think, because you mentioned like your session, and being here at South by EDU, like, we're kind of kicking off day 2 here. So curious if there are any reflections from, conversations or things that you were having this past day, just any of the sort of like kind of the atmosphere, the vibe check, I guess, for you so far from, what has transpired so far at the event.
Yeah, I mean, I always value coming to conferences. The sessions are usually great, but really where I get the most value is when you meet somebody and you start talking about how things are going on at their campus or their role. And, the sharing is I always find extremely helpful. The development of a peer group of similar people and doing similar things is always really helpful. I think we tend to get into these silos a bit on our campus and think about the issues that we're facing. And it's opportunities like this where we realize, everyone's kind of dealing with similar issues. And so I always find that really helpful in talking and obviously advocating for International House and what we do, but also listening to the challenges other campuses are having, other leaders are having, talking to vendors and folks and seeing what solutions are out there to help us. Those are great things. I would say that for the most part, I've found even in the challenges, the headwinds and things that we're facing, there's still a bit of optimism out there in the higher ed world, which may be irrational, but it is good to see. I think a lot of times in higher ed, we tend to, I don't want to say complain a lot, but we like to, focus on what's not working and the frustrations of some of these big administrations and how difficult it is to drive change in some of these organizations. But in these challenging times, I do find that when I talk to people, there is a sense of it'll get better. And so, I think that's a really healthy attitude to have versus just throwing up your hands and saying, well, we're screwed. But really trying to stay optimistic, look for solutions, and try to answer the challenges that are in front of us.
Yeah. Being in a community, I think, does have that kind of energizing, motivating effect where it's like, just the atmosphere, in that regard, I feel like it's just kind of inherent. But then, like going to sessions or just like, kind of mingling and networking, seeing the things that people are working on and just seeing like so many people kind of committed to, making that positive change and pushing things forward and all of that. Cause like I always joke that like higher ed loves like an existential crisis of, whether it's like Wikipedia back in the day or, now like AI or whatever else, but, MOOCs and those sort of things. But,
well, that's, being a 100-year-old institution, when we were founded in 1930 in Berkeley, we were way ahead of our time. The idea of bringing people from around the world to live together. We were the first coeducational dorm west of New York at the time, and iHouse New York was the first one. So, we've been through challenges throughout the last 100 years. We've gone through nationalism. We've gone through isolationism. I remember when I was teaching economics, globalism was a positive, it was an ideal, and now being a globalist is like the worst thing you can be, according to some. And so, we've seen this pendulum kind of swinging back and forth, and being a 100-year-old institution, I think we're able to step back and say, we've been through this before, stay the course, be true to your mission, be true to your values, be true to your ideals, and do the good work. And eventually things will come back in good direction, in where we see the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think it's really hard to, kind of, you were saying, like, the idea of like unwinding, or whatever else, like the idea of like, we are a global society now, like we're so all interconnected. It would be weird of like, all right, guys, we're all just going to go into our separate corners and just be totally self-sufficient and not interact with one another, whatever else. It's like, it's not really realistic. You might like, the way that we all work together might change, and all that sort of stuff. So it is like the idea of like, we got to figure out how to live together. And like, so I think just kind of what you're saying, I think, such a good piece of kind of advice for folks to.
Well, I think that's what, we are a special community. And I get asked like, well, what can we learn from iHouse that we could take to the campus, right? And I think part of the challenge is that people self-select to come into iHouse. So they have the idea of, I want to be in a diverse environment. I want to be in a diverse community. I want to try to understand other people. And if we start with that, we can build a really great community. We value other people. We value differences of opinion. We try to understand each other, find solutions forward together. And that's, a little different than how leadership is taking this country right now. But I think ultimately we will get back to a recognition of like, trying to do this alone, trying to be isolated, trying to not respect the rest of the world or other differences of opinion is a dead end street. I mean, where does that go? Ultimately, you have to have relationships with other people, with other countries, and it has to be built on respect, or otherwise, why would they be interested in working with you? Or
like it being like mutually respecting each other and like mutually beneficial partnerships and relationships and whatever else, like because that means like.
And throughout history, what culture, what society has succeeded in convincing the rest of the world that their view was the only one people should follow?
Right. So, it feels like some like dystopic sci-fi, regime or whatever.
I think 1984 was a book about that. Right?
United States of Earth. So on that point, but I think, you shared some great kind of inspiring advice and just great kind of takeaways from your work and everything. So we'll have to end it there, and we'll have ways to connect with you and the work of, Berkeley's International House, the International House Association, and the episode description so folks can kind of, keep the conversation going, kind of keep the learning going. But just appreciate you for hanging out for this, sharing all that you did and doing the great work that you do there.
No, I appreciate the opportunity to share some of my thoughts with your audience. And let's reconnect in a couple of years and see how
see where we are,
see if this passed the test of time.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you.